The ninth season of Consider This is brought to you in part by From the Top, a national program showcasing the musical talents of young people. From the Top can be heard on KVNO Classical 90.7 each Sunday at 5 p.m.
Consider This, a program of issues and information behind today's news. Once again, from the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha, here is your host, Carol Schrader.
Hello and welcome back to UNO. I'm very pleased to have the Lieutenant Governor as our guest today, Rick Sheehy. You're month number 10 now?
Actually, number 8 since January 24th.
Oh, so I guess I thought I was farther along in the year. This is turned out to be a pretty big job that obviously Governor Heineman, when he appointed you, when he moved up, felt you could handle. Any surprises?
Well, it's just traveling all of the state of Nebraska. I spent a significant amount of time on the road, and probably the most surprising aspect of the job is just the amount of time that we do put into the job. We are working 7 days a week, and we work 15, 16 hours a day, and there's just that much demand that people want to see their state representatives in their communities or their counties.
And if you want to find out where he is, his schedule is posted on his website, on the Nebraska State website, so just in case you don't believe that he works 7 days a week. You are charged with a number of things in the state as Lieutenant Governor. You're one of, I would say the most important thing in a sense is that you are the Director of Homeland Security. And you're one of only a handful of lieutenant governors that have been given that task in the 50 states.
Correct, yeah.
And it has worked out so well with Dave Heineman, and who's got national respect, as has our state emergency management. You feel comfortable now?
Yeah, the state of Nebraska still continues to be on the forefront in Homeland Security. And when we talk about Homeland Security, it has become all-encompassing. A lot of issues are directed to Homeland Security. But I have almost 30 years of emergency services background as a paramedic, his career, and then managing a private ambulance service and involved with rural health and public health. So a lot of that helped me to step right into the program, and previously working with Governor Heineman at some of the bioterrorism and planning for emergencies in the state of Nebraska.
We have heard time and again, in fact, I recently did a series of reports for NET Radio, that Nebraska is prepared. And then comes Katrina, and people wonder just in general, preparedness for emergencies. I mean, bioterrorism would be an emergency, but we tend to prepare for more than one thing. A tornado would also prepare us for something else if we're prepared for that.
Yeah, we prepare for tornadoes, we prepare for winter storms, we prepare because we are an agricultural state. We do have a significant amount of anhydrous plants around and fertilizer plants. So we do prepare for incidences of those should there be some type of a release from those facilities that we would have to work on.
Or a terrorist attack, or
attack,
even just
an
evildoer, as the president
to evacuate
would say.
people, to try and section off areas of the state that we would need to. I think with Hurricane Katrina and Hurricane Rita, people need just to remember the scope, the size of the impact, that it was 90,000 square miles. The state of Nebraska is only 77,000 square miles. So that would be like taking everything off the face of Nebraska. And I know there was a lot of finger pointing that took place, and there's probably some truth to the city's responsibility to respond. They didn't, the state and the federal government. But just the size of the magnitude for anybody to be able to respond to that would be nearly impossible.
But we don't have any oceans, and so hurricanes are not a strong possibility. But we do prepare for things, and I've been to a number of drills over the years, as you have as a paramedic, we do a lot of drills in this state.
We do a lot of drills, and majority of the money that we have gotten from the Department of Homeland Security or from the Center for Disease Control, a lot of that goes out to the regions and the local communities for them to be able to do planning, exercising, and training. Because really, that's where you lay the foundation, the groundwork for all agencies to learn how to respond and how to work together in the event of a disaster or an emergency.
And the state has broken down pretty manageably into sort of, they're not regions, but areas. You know, we have the Omaha metro area here, which even goes over the river into Council Bluffs, and then there they had to work on the communication problem.
Yeah, and across the
For
state of
instance.
Nebraska, we have 13 areas that are working on interoperability, or the ability for emergency responders to be able to communicate on a day-to-day basis, or in the event of an emergency. And we have also identified those areas of common interest for us to work on, also planning, exercising, and training, whether it's a tornado or an agricultural emergency or a terrorist event.
A couple of things have happened in the last few weeks. There's Katrina and Rita that brought to the fore the question of the National Guard and when it's used, when it's deployed, when it's asked for. And then we have something the President brought up this past week of, I want you to think about the possibility of a quarantine, a federally mandated, no choices quarantine if the avian flu were to come, or any pandemic. That's the one that they think has the potential to
Well,
be a
and I
pandemic.
think Nebraska again is a leader in that area. Nebraska has been the only state so far in the country that has put a task force or a panel of people together, broad scope from the general public to healthcare officials to law enforcement to education, to talk about what do we do if we have a pandemic influenza. And there will be a white paper released to the governor, I believe in October this month, with recommendations of what the state of Nebraska should do in the event of a pandemic influenza. The rest of the country will then use that as a boilerplate for them to begin to develop their programs. And it goes back shortly after September 11th that Nebraska put its public health agencies together so that all citizens in the state of Nebraska are representative by a public health entity.
Right, so in Douglas County is a very large one, but when you get out in Lancaster County, but when you get out into the areas are sort of bunched together
Built
to work
into
together.
regions, right. Areas of common interest.
But the question of the National Guard that came up in Katrina, and there's even some fairly good reporting that I've read that talked about governors and mayors worried about the political ramifications of what would it look like if we asked for federal help and everything. Do states like Nebraska learn anything from that in terms of?
Well, and we really do from every incident. And we even initiated part of our state emergency operations plan, was put into place with Katrina and Rita as we began to assimilate our assets that were being requested to go to the Gulf states and or potentially to Texas. And so we looked even how we received evacuees from Louisiana. Part of our emergency operations plan was put together. And so we look and see how the communications went, how the different structures fit together and how did it work. And then we sit down and we talk. What worked, what didn't work, and we make any alterations at that time. And I think what we've found in Nebraska is we have talked previously. So we understand how each of us is going to respond under different circumstances.
One of the things that's interesting is that communication failed on a number of levels, not just from kind of residual of the storm and what came with that, but then also batteries died. Mm-hmm. There just wasn't, even if you had a cell phone, if you could find a tower that could catch you, your battery died. We work on about every level here, the ham radio operators, the REACT, the citizen band operators. I mean, you've got kind of everybody in the loop of potential uses and varieties of communication. If necessary.
And with some of our Homeland Security funds and also funds from the Center for Disease Control, we have purchased satellite telephones. In the event that we do lose our cellular service or our hardline phones, we still have the capabilities to be able to communicate. And those have been distributed in strategic locations across the state of Nebraska, so the governor has access to them, I have access to them, maybe Dr. Schaefer has access from Health and Human Services, and the Med Center, because they play a large part in the public laboratories. They
have a
access.
very important laboratory.
And so we have strategically placed those across the state of Nebraska so that we do have access.
The interesting thing this week when the president talked about, I'm throwing it out on the table, we might have to have a quarantine. There are already certain diseases that are approved for federal mandated quarantine, Ebola, SARS, and a handful of others. But one of the other things that came out, people have been talking on the talk radio station, is Tamiflu, which would an antiviral and things like that, and how are we ready? I mean, another thing is sort of brought attention to the national readiness plan, not just anti-terrorism.
Well, and I think with our pandemic influenza panel that we have put together, we will now be able to publicly begin to talk about what our plan is. And part of, through my office, we do have a group which is called the Executive Committee. It's made up of the largest employers across the state of Nebraska. How are we going to communicate the public health message down to the neighborhood level, down to the individual? If we do have a pandemic influenza, bird flu, or the avian flu, how do we communicate that? And who's most appropriate to be able to communicate that message? Is it the government? That probably make people a little uneasy if the government is trying to deliver the message versus somebody, their mayor or the administrator from their hospital, or somebody that the community knows that has that relationship with the community. And so we'll begin to work on that. So in the event we do have to isolate people or we do have to quarantine people, we know how we're going to deliver that message, and the public will have already been educated that when they receive the message on how they should react and know that they do need to listen to their public officials.
One of the things that I heard occasionally in the discussion after Katrina and Rita was something that I wonder, because of the scope of it and the finger pointing, that it may fall on deaf ears, and that's personal preparedness. We have a wealth, any American has a wealth of resources to find out how to shelter in place, what to take with them, what to have ready to take with them if they have to leave their homes. But I don't hear people that I talk with, friends, whatever, talking about that. They're talking about the big picture, but...
Yeah. And it really is. There is a certain amount of individual responsibility to take care of yourself. Just this last week, we were in Colorado talking about the Mid-State Alliance. And what that is, it's the 10 states from FEMA Region 7 and 8 talking about public health emergencies and how they can share resources. But we also talked about Katrina, and it's either in Montana or Wyoming. When they do their public education, they call it a program called Yo-Yo 24, and it stands for you're on your own for 24 hours. So if we have an event that has significant impact on a community or the state, an individual is on their own for 24 hours. So
that's the worst case scenario. I mean, because if there are first responders, they can only go to so many places.
Go to so many places.
And there might be impediments getting there.
And so that's an educational tool that they teach. They call it Yo-Yo 24. Just like when we talk about winter storm watches, we tell people you should make sure you have water, make sure you have food.
Batteries.
You may be stranded in your house for 3 or 4 days before you can get out and get those supplies.
And many were in 1997 in the Lincoln area and Omaha and down southeastern Nebraska.
With tornadoes, we don't have that luxury because they do happen so quickly.
Right, but winter storms,
but people who live in the hurricane areas, generally they have a number of days to prepare to either evacuate. And I even know that the mayor of New Orleans told people that if they were coming to the Dome, make sure you bring your pillows, bring some water, or 3 or 4 days of food to be able to take care of yourselves. And when you saw the lines on the news media, most people arrived without anything.
So we've learned some lessons here in Nebraska with the pandemic flu, the potential of that. You've already prepared. In fact, our new state medical officer told me that other states were amazed that we had done that. They were kind of shocked and are now asking her questions about this committee.
Nebraska is, the committee, the task force that is working, and they'll be putting the white paper out to the governor with the recommendations. But I think how we have structured our public health agencies across the state of Nebraska, some of them did do some training for potential smallpox and put plans into place of how they would do mass immunization, how they would do quarantining. And so as we have put plans together, we've tried to use some common sense so that we can use them in other ways, in other varieties of illnesses.
Let's move on to one of your other things that you do, of the many things that you do. You are the head of the Nebraska Information Technology Commission. Now, to me, knowing, well, I suppose many people, knowing what we do about the importance of information technology, how important IT is. I mean, it is the phrase IT in the world today, that getting Nebraska wired, getting them able to work and play on a broadband, et cetera, is a key priority.
Yeah, and the Nebraska Information Technology Commission was put together by the legislature by statute, probably about 4 or 5 years ago. And the idea was for this 9-member board to be able to look to see how to improve the delivery of healthcare services, educational services, electronic government, business within the state of Nebraska. And so under the commission itself, we have several groups that work on it. We have an education group who's working particularly very hard right now on distance education for K through 12 and secondary education and long distance learning. How do we make sure we give equitable education to all students at all levels across the state of Nebraska? And there's a task force working on that now. Telehealth is being delivered all across the state of Nebraska.
We were a leader in rural health.
Yes.
In terms of
Yes.
that sort of thing.
Yes, and telehealth really has augmented the rural health. People now have the ability to go to a local clinic or their hospital and sit and do synchronized video with a physician in Omaha or Lincoln, so that they don't have to make that trip. And it may be before they need to come to Lincoln or Omaha for services, or after they've been in Lincoln or Omaha for services. So it does save that significant amount of travel time. A lot of healthcare professionals are using now the telehealth network to do education, to do continuing education. Doctors use it for ground rounds and those types of things to be able to communicate.
The importance of, you're also involved with the economic development in the broad picture in Nebraska. That IT, that ability, that infrastructure is critical to economic development.
Well, I think it's very important that the infrastructure that we have in Nebraska, we have companies in western Nebraska, central Nebraska, that have connected into the backbone that is put into place. And really what the state does is goes out and coordinates getting all the telecommunication companies, the cable companies, and anybody who's providing broadband services to provide services to the state through the backbone. And then we have businesses and industries and government that then have the ability to access that and either sell their products or communicate worldwide.
How wired is Nebraska? Where are the deficits? Where are the weak spots?
Well, based upon what the private sector tells me, who owns all of the infrastructure, the broadband infrastructure, they tell us that there's the 95% of the state of Nebraska is covered, that there is some level of broadband services or advanced information technology infrastructure in place in Nebraska. And it's just what it gets to is the ability for people to be able to afford to pay to connect to that. Just like the same way when the utility companies build that last mile of line, electrical wire to somebody's house, that's the most expensive last mile. And so really what it has come down to is the ability for some people to be able to afford to connect into the structure itself.
Now, since we're 95% wired in a sense, or the ability to hook up, then it's not like the need for, remember when we had the Rural Electrification Administration where they, you know, because it wasn't affordable for people in states and counties to put up those electric lines. Is there any kind of thing like that we need for our more, states with more remote locations?
I think what we have found, the private telecommunication companies really is they have made improvements on their lines, getting away from the copper wire. They are hanging fiber. And because they're using it for their switching stations. There's a question right now whether or not in some of those areas where we still have public utilities, and maybe in that area, should we allow the public utilities to get into the business of providing the information technology. And there will be a committee that the legislature put together this last session to evaluate that. Should the public utilities be able to get into the business of providing telecommunication services or phone services in those areas that are underserved?
Underserved and perhaps not the pick of the litter spots in the state for the bigger companies.
And
You know, I
correct.
mean, it's just not
You
they're
know,
not.
and it'll get in really to the philosophy question: should the public be competing with the private? And I think this group is made up of, well, myself as the chairman of the NITC, plus there'll be representatives from education and representatives from business, private business and industry, plus the public utilities.
But there may be areas where it wouldn't be competition until it gets laid down, and then the companies
and-
want
and
in there.
In the way that the Nebraska is structured, we are a totally public power state, which means a private firm cannot get into the electric business. And so we just need to make sure that the playing field is level. If either other is going to get into either other's business.
And it's been very confusing if you even watch the commercials and what's happened over the last few years, because telephones have gotten into, hardwired telephones into cell phones and into like Cox in Omaha and the internet, and then now digital, and it's they're all wanting to get in on the same line system because it's cheaper if you can do more services.
You know, and with broadband now, people are using their computers to be able to talk. They're just talking over the fiber wire, so they don't have a cell phone or they don't have a telephone in their house, but they're using technology and cameras through their computers to talk to their friends, their family, coast to coast.
It's amazing what they can do. One of the other things that we're looking at nationally right now is an energy crunch. We've had ethanol plants in Nebraska for some time, and you can debate whether it's where it costs more in energy to create the ethanol, but soy diesel is a hot topic now, and we don't have any soy diesel plants in Nebraska that I know of. Is that something
There,
that
I think what we have to do through the energy policy and as we move forward, we need to find ways to have less reliance upon crude oil and particularly foreign oil. And really, if you utilize ethanol, and in the early years, ethanol did cost more to produce than gasoline, but now it is cheaper, and that's why when you see the blends, it generally is cheaper than just gasoline. But it goes back to having a less reliance on foreign oil and crude oil. And right here in Nebraska, we have the crops. We have the soybean, which can be milled and then taken the oil and turned into or biodiesel fuels or soy diesel. And in Nebraska, most of the diesel engines, the newer ones, can burn that. And Governor Heineman did sign an executive order probably 90 days ago to use biodiesel fuel in all state diesel vehicles, wherever we can have the fuel, and or to use E85 or the 85% ethanol.
There aren't that many availability spots to get E85 in Nebraska.
No, and it is difficult. They're beginning to grow, and part of it is because it's not refined in such large bulk, and the stations themselves only have small tanks. And so it's going to be, I think it will grow once we begin to see the demand for more and more of it. But we're going to have to find those alternatives until we get to hydrogen-fueled cars, which is probably 15, 20 years away.
So is there you sit in a position where, this isn't your area of expertise, but you hear enough about it. Is there any kind of leadership nationally or with corporations working with the government to figure out kind of how we're going to do this or where we're going to go? Should we invest our money in terms of alternative or biofuels?
And I think Nebraska has made the commitment to ethanol and biodiesel fuels, whether that's soy diesel or from some other means, because we do have the corn, we do have the soybean. And this last legislative session, with the work of Governor Heineman and the state legislature, there was a piece of legislation that was passed called the Nebraska Advantage. It was LB 312, LB 90. LB 90 is the part of the legislation that deals with incenting ethanol and biodiesel fuels, and to be able to do research and development so that we have more facilities, put more facilities online to produce ethanol. And also at the federal level, the House and the Senate this last session passed a piece of legislation requiring 800 million gallons of ethanol be blended.
And we were very happy to hear that.
We were very happy to see that. Yes, we were, because of the amount of ethanol that we do. And 25% of our corn that we have in Nebraska now is turned into ethanol or some value-added product.
You know, it's interesting with it's a catch-22. If that becomes even more popular, maybe the more in demand, and all somebody always eats our corn or processes our corn or our soybeans. I mean, we have good stuff we grow here, but supply and demand may start to take effect, and the price could go up. But I'd rather see the price go up for corn than for oil gotten somewhere else.
And it does have a direct impact on all of our regions in the state where we have an ethanol plant. The producer receives 5 to 8 cents more per bushel for his corn that he's selling to somebody who does produce ethanol. But there are also other products that do come from corn, or they do come from soy. I was up in Blair probably 90 days ago. From a byproduct after they process the corn that they don't use in the ethanol production. They then put some bacteria and amino acids into a product. They turn it into plastic pellets, and then they turn it into fiber. And so I actually have a polo shirt that I wear. I wash it, I dry it, just as every other piece of clothing. But it is a polo shirt made from corn.
See, American ingenuity is always what expands our economy.
And yes.
we're very glad that
So
we're
we just
good
need to
at it.
continue to find ways to utilize our products in the state of Nebraska.
We just have a couple of minutes left, and in your first 8+ months, is there anything that surprises you about the role of Lieutenant Governor or being in a key leadership position in the state? Any kind of surprises or happy or not
I
happy?
just I have been from one end of the spectrum to the other. I've met with President Bush when he was in Omaha. I met with President Karzai when he was in Omaha. So I get to meet a lot of high-ranking world leaders. But just the other night, I had the opportunity to spend a couple hours with some gentlemen at the Lincoln Penitentiary who are part of a Toastmasters. It's a club that has been there for 25 years. They invited me to come talk about leadership, and really these are gentlemen in the penitentiary who are really trying to make a better way of life.
Improve
themselves, learn some leadership skills, learn how to communicate with people. And so
Well, I should have gone to Toastmasters because I should find a better way to get out of this show because we're running out of time.
Oh, okay.
I want to thank you. But in other words,
Thank you.
that's making up for those long hours and
Yes,
getting
yes,
to do all
it
that
is. So
stuff.
Nebraska is a great state and just has so many wonderful things.
Thank you so much. Lieutenant Governor, I hate cutting off a Lieutenant Governor. Thank you,
Thank
Rasheed,
you.
for
You
joining
bet.
us. And thank you for joining us on Consider This.
Consider This is an issues and information program produced by UNO Television. More information and program archives can be found at unotv.unomaha.edu. If you'd like to share your comments about this show, call UNO TV at 402-554-2516 during regular business hours.
The 9th season of Consider This is brought to you in part by From the Top, a national program showcasing the musical talents of young people. From the Top can be heard on KVNO Classical 90.7 each Sunday at 5 p.m.